In the quiet town of Leongatha, nestled within the rolling green hills of Victoria, Australia, life moved at a gentle rhythm. This was the kind of place where neighbors exchanged greetings across picket fences, where community gatherings were commonplace, and where tragedy seemed like something that belonged to another world. But in July of 23, this serene community would be shaken to its core by a crime that sounded almost too strange to be true. A crime that combined family ties, betrayal, and one of nature's deadliest poisons. It was a story that would grip not only Leongatha, but also the entire nation of Australia, eventually becoming known around the world as the Mushroom Murders. At the center of it all was Erin Patterson, a woman whose name would soon become synonymous with calculated deceit and unthinkable cruelty. What began as a seemingly ordinary family lunch would end in tragedy, leaving 3 people dead, 1 man clinging to life, and investigators piecing together the puzzle of how something so monstrous could unfold in such an ordinary setting. It was a Saturday afternoon in late July 23 when Erin Patterson invited 4 of her estranged in-laws for lunch at her home. The guest list included Don and Gail Patterson, her former parents-in-law, Heather Wilkinson, the sister of Gail, and Heather's husband Ian Wilkinson, a respected local pastor. On the surface, the meal appeared to be a gesture of reconciliation, a family gathering intended to bridge strained ties following Erin's separation from her husband, Simon Patterson. The centerpiece of the lunch was a beef Wellington, a dish considered indulgent, even celebratory. Yet, hidden within its layers of pastry and beef was a secret ingredient with devastating consequences: the death-cap mushroom, Amanita phalloides. Known as one of the most poisonous fungi in the world, even a small portion can cause SIES, catastrophic liver failure, with death following within days if untreated. As the lunch unfolded, nothing seemed amiss. The guests enjoyed the meal, unaware that each bite brought them closer to tragedy. Conversation flowed, laughter echoed, and the fragile fabric of family appeared to be momentarily repaired. No one suspected that this gathering would become the scene of one of the most shocking crimes in Australia's recent history. Within hours, however, the poison began to take hold. Don, Gail, and Heather fell violently ill, their bodies racked with the first symptoms of mushroom toxicity: severe vomiting, stomach pain, and relentless diarrhea. Ian Wilkinson also became gravely sick, though by some stroke of fate, he would ultimately survive. The victims were rushed to hospital, but despite desperate efforts by doctors, Don, Gail, and Heather succumbed to the poison. Ian endured a lengthy, agonizing recovery, describing himself later as left half alive, not only by the toll of the toxin, but by the unbearable grief of losing his wife and closest friends. Ian Wilkinson's survival was nothing short of remarkable. The poison had ravaged his body, leaving him weak, scarred, and emotionally shattered. As a local pastor, he had dedicated his life to offering comfort to others, yet now he found himself consumed by his own unimaginable loss. He had watched his wife, Heather, suffer and die, powerless to save her. He had lost 2 lifelong friends in the same horrific event. Later, in interviews, Ian would describe himself as half alive. His words were not just a reflection of his physical state, but of his spirit, fractured by trauma, weighed down by grief, and haunted by memories of that lunch. His survival, however, would prove crucial in piecing together the sequence of events that unfolded in Erin Patterson's kitchen. It was his testimony, along with the forensic evidence, that would help investigators build the case against her. At first, investigators considered the possibility that the poisonings were accidental. Death-cap mushrooms are notorious in parts of Victoria, where they can grow unnoticed in gardens and bushland. Cases of accidental ingestion, though rare, are not unheard of. But as police dug deeper, doubts emerged. Erin Patterson's account of events was inconsistent. She claimed that she had bought the mushrooms from an Asian grocery store and that she herself had eaten the meal, but curiously she reported only mild illness afterward. Later, she suggested she had used a mix of button mushrooms and dried mushrooms purchased months earlier. Investigators noted her evasive answers and shifting narratives. Forensic testing confirmed the presence of death-cap mushrooms in the victim's systems. Toxicology results painted a grim picture. This was not just food poisoning. This was the deliberate use of a lethal toxin. Adding to the suspicions were troubling reports about Erin's past. Her estranged husband, Simon Patterson, had previously suffered a mysterious illness that left him hospitalized in 22. At the time, no cause had been confirmed, but the pattern now seemed chillingly familiar. Some began to wonder whether Erin's alleged attempts at reconciliation were merely a facade for something much darker. The case took a dramatic turn in August 23 when Erin Patterson provided police with a written statement. In it, she sought to explain her side of the story. While denying that she had deliberately poisoned her guests, she made startling admissions about what had happened in the aftermath of the lunch. Her confession read, "I now very much regret not answering some of the questions following this tragedy immediately. I am now wanting to clear up the record because I have become extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the deaths of my loved ones. I am now wanting to clear up the record because I have become extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the deaths of my loved ones. I am now wanting to clear up the record because I have become extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the deaths of my loved ones. I am now wanting to clear up the record because I have become extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the deaths of my loved ones. I am now wanting to clear up the record because I have become extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the deaths of my loved ones. I am devastated to think that these mushrooms may have contributed to the illness suffered by my loved ones. I am now wanting to clear up the record because I have become extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the deaths of my loved ones. I did not do anything to intentionally harm these people whom I loved." In her statement, Erin admitted to lying to police about certain details, including what had happened to leftovers from the meal. She acknowledged that she had indeed put the remnants of the beef Wellington into the bin, later retrieving them to provide to hospital staff for testing. Crucially, she also confessed that her estranged husband, Simon, had not been at the lunch because she had invited him, but he had refused to attend. While Erin denied intentionally poisoning her guests, the inconsistencies in her statement only deepened suspicion. For investigators, her words revealed a tangled web of half-truths and deliberate obfuscation. By November 2023, after months of careful investigation, Erin Patterson was arrested at her home and charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder.
An Australian woman has been charged with murder after the deaths of 3 people by suspected mushroom poisoning. Erin Patterson's alleged victims died after eating a family lunch she'd served them at her home, a dish thought to have contained death-cap mushrooms, as Richard Galpin now reports.
Police have been searching Erin Patterson's home in the small town of Leongatha, southeast of Melbourne, from early today. The arrest and charges of the 49-year-old come more than 3 months after the suspected poisoning took place at a lunch. She'd invited her ex-in-laws Gail and Don Patterson and Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson and her husband Ian Wilkinson to her home. Within days, 3 of them were dead. Only Ian Wilkinson survived. Toxicology reports suggest the victims had consumed death-cap mushrooms. In a written statement to police, Erin Patterson said she had bought button mushrooms at a supermarket and dried fungi at an Asian grocery store and used them in a beef Wellington dish.
Today's arrest is just the next step in what has been a complex and thorough investigation by Homicide Squad detectives, and one that is not yet over. We are being assisted by the AFP's technology detector dogs.
Erin Patterson has been charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. She denies the charges. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
The charges reflected not only the fatal lunch, but also earlier suspected attempts to poison Simon Patterson. The arrest sent shockwaves across Australia. The case had already attracted intense media coverage, with daily headlines dissecting every detail of Erin's life, her marriage, and her relationships with her in-laws. Now, with murder charges formally laid, the narrative shifted from suspicion to accountability. The so-called mushroom murderer was no longer a figure of speculation, but a woman facing the full weight of the law. The trial began in mid-2025 in Victoria's Supreme Court, and was one of the most closely followed legal proceedings in the state's recent history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, and members of the public, all eager to witness the unraveling of the case. Prosecutors laid out their evidence methodically. They argued that Erin Patterson had carefully planned the fatal lunch, using the deadly mushrooms as a weapon. They presented toxicology reports, forensic evidence, and testimonies from experts who explained the nature of death-cap poisoning. The prosecution also highlighted Simon Patterson's previous mysterious illness, suggesting a pattern of attempted poisonings. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Ian Wilkinson. Weak but resolute, he recounted the horror of that lunch, the sudden onset of illness, and the unimaginable grief of losing his wife and friends. His survival, he explained, was both a curse and a duty, to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. The defense, meanwhile, argued that Erin Patterson was guilty of negligence, but not intent. They portrayed her as a woman overwhelmed by personal struggles, a mother caught in tragic circumstances. But her prior dishonesty, her shifting accounts, and the overwhelming weight of the evidence made the defense's arguments ring hollow. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Erin Patterson was guilty on all charges, 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. The courtroom was hushed as the foreperson read the decision. For the families of the victims, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice delivered, but lives still lost. The judge in sentencing described Erin's actions as a chilling betrayal of trust and a calculated act of cruelty. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 30 years, a sentence reflecting both the gravity of her crimes and the devastation they had caused.
We start with news from Australia, where Erin Patterson, who came to be known as the mushroom killer, has been sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 33 years behind bars. She was found guilty of killing 3 relatives and trying to kill another at a family lunch in 2023, where she served beef Wellington laced with toxic mushrooms. At the sentencing hearing, the judge said the substantial planning of the murders and Patterson's lack of remorse meant her sentence should be lengthy.
For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Gail Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. All sentences are to be served concurrently. The total effective sentence is life imprisonment, and I fix a non-parole period of 33 years.
I spoke to Katie Watson, our Australia correspondent, shortly after the verdict was read.
Yeah, so she's been given life in prison for 3 murders that of Don and Gail Patterson, her in-laws, and Heather Wilkinson, Gail's sister. 3 of the guests. The 4th guest, Ian Wilkinson, he survived. She's been given 25 years for his attempted murder, all to be served concurrently. But as you said, she has been given a non-parole period of 33 years, which means if she does ever leave prison, then she will be over 80 years old. Now, it was the sentencing took about 45 minutes or so throughout the time. Just briefly, she had her eyes open at the beginning of the sentencing, but as he started talking about the impact on her children and going into more detail of what happened at that fateful lunch back in July 2023, she shut her eyes. They remained shut for the whole of the sentencing until she was asked to stand, and he delivered those 3 life sentences. Then at that point she left, gripping onto the benches as she walked by, and then she'll be taken in a police van to start her life sentence.
And Katie, I understand that Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving lunch guest, has been speaking to the media. What's he been saying?
Yeah, the family's been hasn't given any interviews to the media. They've maintained their silence, and the community has very much protected them. But on the steps of the court, he gave a statement thanking the health professionals, thanking the lawyers, but also a message of kindness and talking about the importance of being kind. Of course, this is a very religious family, and that has been something that's been throughout the trial. And in fact, the judge made these points, talking about the fact that she committed these crimes to people who had never deserved it, who had always shown her kindness throughout her life. That's something that he made clear once again today. So yeah, we heard from Ian Wilkinson the first time he's ever actually spoken. It was a brief press conference, if you like, and then he walked off very slowly. Of course, he has not fully recovered from the effects of that lunch. He still has health problems because of that, even though, of course, he recovered. He spent a long time in hospital recovering from those death cap mushrooms that killed his wife and his brother and sister-in-law.
Yeah, and just to come back to the sentencing, this is an incredibly high-profile case. Was this level of sentencing expected?
Yeah, I mean, this has garnered worldwide attention. In fact, it was one of the reasons why the sentencing was allowed to be broadcast. Such was the importance of the case to be able to show the world the process of the sentencing and the trial. The judge also made clear that because of the notoriety of her crimes, that her life in prison will be very difficult. She's in almost isolation, spending 22 hours a day in her cell. She gets her food delivered in a metal flap under her door, and that's something that he made very clear, that this is not something that's going to go away. Her notoriety will remain with her. So, she's at risk of other prisoners, and that will make her life much more difficult. But yeah, it's a trial that has seen so much attention. The media benches were packed this morning. There were people watching who'd come and accompanied the trial throughout. So it's been a big trial here in Melbourne.
Experts who studied Erin Patterson's behavior described her as manipulative, calculating, and lacking empathy. Her use of the death cap mushroom, a weapon that is both subtle and devastating, suggested a high degree of planning. Psychologists pointed to traits of narcissism and control, noting her ability to present a facade of normalcy while harboring darker intentions. Her choice of weapon was telling. Poison has long been associated with crimes of intimacy, murders committed not in moments of passion, but in cold, deliberate calculation. It requires patience, knowledge, and a willingness to exploit the trust of those closest to the perpetrator. Erin Patterson's actions fit this mold precisely. The murders reverberated far beyond the Patterson and Wilkinson families. In Leongatha, a community built on trust and connection, the crime shattered a sense of security. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the woman who had committed such horrific acts. The case also sparked broader conversations across Australia about food safety, trust within families, and the hidden dangers of domestic violence in less visible forms. Erin Patterson's actions became a cautionary tale about deception, manipulation, and the fragility of human trust. The story of Erin Patterson, the so-called mushroom murderer, is one that defies easy explanation. It is a tale of betrayal masked as reconciliation, of poison hidden within a celebratory dish, and of a crime that transformed an ordinary family gathering into a national tragedy. For Ian Wilkinson, survival came at an immense cost. His testimony ensured that justice was done, but nothing could restore the lives lost or heal the wounds inflicted. For the families of Don, Gail, and Heather, grief endures, tempered only by the knowledge that the truth emerged. And for Australia, the case serves as a grim reminder. Evil can lurk even in the most familiar settings, hidden behind smiles, gestures of kindness, and the comforting rituals of family. Erin Patterson's story is not just about murder. It is about trust betrayed, lives destroyed, and the enduring resilience of those left behind.